What's up, everybody? I'm Jason and welcome back to the channel. So today I'm going to do something a little bit different from what I usually do because I don't normally do product reviews. However, I wanted to talk a little bit about the latest piece of gear that I've acquired, and that's Aputure's Amaran P60C LED light. Now, if you're not familiar with Aputure's Amaran series of lights, they're aimed at bringing basically most of the capabilities of their high-end Lightstorm series to a more YouTuber scale budget. Now, the P60C itself is a 60-watt RGBWW LED panel that measures 10.67 by 8.39 by 1.7 inches, or 27.1 by 21.3 by 4.34 centimeters overall, and has an active area that's 10.5 by 8.25 inches, or 26.9 by 21 centimeters. RGBWW means that it uses 5 different types of LED diodes. Red, green, and blue provide the color and color effects, and a warm or tungsten white and cool or daylight white LED provide the white. Aputure advertises the light as having pretty good color rendition specs with a TLCI greater than equal to 96, a tungsten SSI greater than or equal to 83, and a D65 SSI greater than or equal to 74. Now, included in the box is basically everything you'll need to get started. So an AC power supply and a cord, a collapsible softbox, a collapsible grid for the softbox, a light stand adapter, a spigot for the stand adapter to mount to the light, and a carrying case. Now, power delivery for the P60C is reminiscent of many of Aputure's other products, just scaled down some. So the included power brick uses an IEC C13/14 style plug and connect socket, which you'll probably immediately recognize as a computer power cable. Included with the power supply is a 5-foot or 1.5 meter locking IEC C13 cable. Now, this is the first time that I've encountered a locking IEC cable like this, so that was kind of interesting. However, the included cable is a bit short for my tastes. That said, since it's just a computer power cable and this is only a 90-watt power brick, you can replace it with pretty much any other computer power style cord of any reasonable length. Now, the included power brick is, as I said, rated at 90 watts and outputs 6 amps at 15 volts. It's a universal input power supply, meaning it can run on input voltages from 100 to 240 volts, so you can take it anywhere in the world, and all you have to do to make it plug in locally is swap out the cable for one with local plugs. Now, unfortunately, while the input side of the power supply is something that's standard and pretty readily available and can be replaced, the output side isn't. The output is a hardwired 10-foot or 3-meter cord with a custom self-locking waterproof DC connector on the end. Now, I certainly do appreciate that Aputure uses locking cables in all of their products, including these lower tier ones. That said, the waterproof part of the DC connector, which they do advertise in the specs, is a bit beyond me, as neither the panel or the power supply are waterproof or rated for use in wet locations. Moreover, the connector is apparently custom made for Aputure, or at least I haven't found an off-the-shelf replacement part for it. So if you do have a problem with the power supply or its cord, you'll have to go back to Aputure to source a replacement. You can't just get something off the shelf. Now, alternatively, the P60C can be powered from a pair of Sony NPF-style batteries, and you will need to use 2, as both batteries are needed to power up the light. Moreover, given the fixture's maximum power draw of 78 watts, you'll want to use either 700 or 900 series batteries to get any kind of appreciable runtime. Aputure specifically calls for NPF 950 or 970 batteries. However, my light worked just fine with generic NPF 770s, so your mileage may vary there. Now, when operating in battery mode, the battery percentage and estimated runtime are displayed on the screen on the back of the light. At full brightness at 5600 Kelvin, I saw an estimated runtime of 34 minutes using my 37 watt-hour batteries. Dropping the output to 50% increased that to just over an hour, and dropping it to 2.5 or 25% pushed it to over 2 hours, basically what you would expect. Now, that said, the exact power draw does depend on the brightness and which LEDs are active, so different colors will have different power requirements. Alternatively, if you want to use cinema-style batteries with DTAP style power outputs, Aputure sells a $15 DTAP to DC cable that plugs into the DC port on the light. Now, all that said, the P60C only has soft power off or sleep mode, not a hard power off setting. This is, of course, necessary for wireless control to be able to turn the light back on when it's been turned off. However, this also does mean that it draws power while it is off. Now, I discovered this, much to my chagrin, when it drained the two NPF 770 batteries that I had left attached to it overnight. I probably should have expected this given the lack of an actual power switch, but I didn't, or at least I figured it wouldn't be as significant. With the light's power supply plugged into a kilowatt power meter, I measured a 1 watt power draw while it was turned off. Now, while this was at the other end of the power supply, which has its own electronics and inefficiencies, I suspect the light's actual power consumption is somewhere in that neighborhood. Couple that with the partially discharged batteries that I had on the light at the time, and it's really not hard to see how I ended up with dead batteries some 12 to 18 hours later. In short, don't leave batteries on this light when you're not using it, at least not if you want them to be fully charged, and especially not overnight. Now, the P60C can be controlled using either local controls at the light or through Aputure's Sidus Link App. Local control is straightforward enough and covers the entire gamut of the light's features. There are 3 dials on the back that give you quick access to brightness, color temperature, gel type, effect, hue, and saturation, basically all of the settings, depending on the mode you have the light set to, and you also use these dials to switch modes and navigate the menu. Alternatively, there are 4 programmable preset buttons that you can use to quickly recall a specific option or setting at your leisure. Press the button to recall the setting, press and hold the button to save the current setting to that preset. However, the other option is the Sidus Link app, and that is an entirely different kettle of fish that allows you to extend the control that you have over the light far beyond just what you can do at the light or with a single light. Now, completely covering everything the Sidus Link app does and its features is way beyond the scope of this video, but there are some things that I want to talk about briefly that I ran into. So to start with, one thing I like about the Sidus Mesh network is that it uses Bluetooth and not Wi-Fi. This means that you can control a Sidus Light network without having to disconnect your phone from the Wi-Fi network it's connected to, and in fact, or put the lights on the Wi-Fi network that you are connected to. And in fact, taking things a step further, it doesn't require internet access, a Wi-Fi access point, or even an account for you to be able to download the app and control your lights. Now, for me, this is doubly smart as Canon's camera control software does use Wi-Fi for its full control functionality, specifically a network usually generated by the camera, and not having to switch networks means that I can have my phone or tablet connected to my camera, controlling it, and be able to switch over and control the lights with the Sidus Link app. Sure, using Bluetooth does limit the maximum range, although Aputure claims a range of 80 meters. Moreover, the Sidus network uses a mesh topology, so each light links to the next. This means that you don't have to keep your phone or tablet within 80 meters of all the devices, just within the range of one light on the network. Now, I also like that the Sidus Link app doesn't require an account to use. Everybody wants an account now for everything. This is nice. You can operate in guest mode, which gives you full local control over the Sidus network that you connect to. That said, there are some limits to what you can do with guest mode, and for that matter, what the Sidus Link app can do as a whole, some of which are a little weird. For starters, while in guest mode, you can't connect 2 controlling devices to a Sidus network. Well, actually, this seems to be a problem even with an account, but for different reasons. So, for example, I'd like to be able to have both my tablet and my phone connected to my P60C, and I can't do that. In guest mode, I can't do that without resetting the Bluetooth connection on the light, which is kind of a pain, and then creating a new scene or re-adding the light to the app each time I want to switch devices. Now, you can work around some of this limitation with a Sidus Link account. In this case, the app will sync your scenes to the Sidus cloud servers, and you can log in with another device and the scenes will sync down to that device. So at least at least here you don't have to reset the Bluetooth on the light to change from device to device. However, while this sounds good in practice, the Sidus Link software doesn't allow more than one device to be logged into the same account at the same time. So if I log my phone in, my tablet gets logged out, and I have to log in there to be able to use the tablet. However, when I do that, my phone then gets logged out. Now, in theory, I might be able to sign up with 2 accounts and share the network between them and blah, 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 but this whole situation really is a bit ridiculous. I should be able to simply add more than one controller to a Sidus network, even in guest mode. Moreover, since Bluetooth is bidirectional, it should be able to update changes to all the attached controllers when I make a change from one of them, or even from the light itself. Now, the P60C is part of Aputure's Amaran or Creators line of products. These are lights that are aimed to lower budget operations compared to their Lightstorm line, and of course this comes with some compromises to make the lights more cost effective. That said, while the P60C may not be quite as flexible as a Lightstorm RGB panel, it still hits all the major capabilities tick boxes. So the P60C offers several lighting modes, starting with CCT, or correlated color temperature, basically the Kelvin numbers that you're probably used to seeing. That on top of that, you have gelled sources, full HSI color control, and of course, special effects. So when dealing with white light, the P60C has a few ways to adjust the white light that you're actually shooting with. So to start with, you can simply set the color temperature in Kelvin and then dial in a green magenta correction if you need it. This is probably the way most of us will end up working if you're using other LED sources that work with Kelvin color temperatures, or really anytime you know the color temperature you actually need to work at. Now, a second option to do white light is to use the gel mode. Gel mode allows you to select either a 3200 Kelvin or 5600 Kelvin based light source and then gel it using CTO or CTB or various color gels. So in other words, if you know that the light you need to match is tungsten with a half CTB gel, maybe because it is tungsten with a half CTB gel, then you can pick the tungsten option and then set a half CTB gel as the gel, and the fixture, the light, figures out what it needs to do to get to the color temperature to reproduce that look. Now, the gel section also brings us into the color options as well. So in addition to the CTO and CTB options, there are also color gel presets such as magenta 10 or cyan 90. And like the CTO and CTB gels, these color gels can be combined with a base light source that's either tungsten or daylight balanced. Now that said, none of the color gels that I see in the lamp correspond to named gels from big gel producers like Roscoe or Lee. So if, for example, you have lights gelled with Roscoe's Alice Blue, there is no Alice Blue setting on the P60C. You'll have to figure out a different way to match that light. Secondly, there is a big discrepancy between what you can do in gel mode locally on the light and through the Sidus Link app. Locally, you can access all of the color gels and apply both CTO and CTB gels to either tungsten or daylight sources. Additionally, there is a double CTO and double CTB option available. Through the Sidus Link app, you can only apply CTB or CTO gels to tungsten or daylight sources respectively. So in other words, you can only select CTO gels if you've selected a daylight source, or CTB gels if you've selected the tungsten one. Moreover, there is no option for any of the color gels, and the double CTO and double CTB gels are missing as well. Now, the other approach to coloring the light is to use the HSI mode, where you can specify the hue, saturation, and intensity. Hue can be set in 1 degree increments from 0 to 360 degrees. Saturation covers the range from 0 to 100 in 1 unit steps, and intensity is the light's regular output control from 0 to 100%. Now, the final lighting mode is FX mode. There are 11 built-in effects covering a wide variety of uses. These include lightning, paparazzi, strobe, cop car, fireworks, pulsating, faulty light, fire, TV, and party lights. Huh, that's odd. Oh, that's not good. Several of these effects are also included on Aputure's other lights, but several are new to the RGB lights, or at least new to me since this is the first RGB light of theirs that I have. Better yet, most of the effects have tunable handles that you can use to customize them to the look that you want. So for example, you can pick whether your movie's police department uses blue, red and blue, or red, blue, and white light bars on their police cars. Now, of course, behind all of this is control, or specifically how the light's onboard computer controls the LED output based on your selected brightness and color settings. And this is one of the places where Aputure has made some compromises to cut cost, as this is a PWM or pulse width modulation controlled panel. What this means is that the brightness is controlled by rapidly flickering the lights on and off with varying duty cycles. If this is done fast enough, our eyes, and more importantly our cameras, just see a smooth shift in brightness, and not flicker. Of course, turning an LED on and off, regardless of how fast you do it, does mean that it is flickering. However, this still may not be a problem as long as the flicker rate is fast enough. To that end, the P60C has a PWM frequency that ranges between 18 and 20 kHz. This should be fast enough to shoot at most frame rates and most shutter speeds flicker-free. However, in the event that you do run into a combination of settings where the flicker becomes noticeable, you can fine-tune the PWM frequency in 100Hz increments in that range. Now that said, in my testing with the light set to the default 20 kHz PWM frequency, I could shoot at 240 frames per second and not have any discernible flicker in the resulting video. So in short, PWM control on the P60C seems to be good enough that the light appears to be flicker-free for pretty much all normal video uses. Now that said, don't expect this to be the right light if you're looking to shoot at really high frame rates, such as 1000 frames per second or higher. Now, one other cost-cutting measure that Aputure apparently took with the P60C is the light's dimming range and control. Like most LED companies, Aputure has adopted a percentage scale for displaying or controlling their dimming range, and they advertise continuous control over the full 100% range. Now, the good news here is that you do get that. They're not cheating you there. You can dim the light all the way from 100% maximum brightness to the light actually turning off at 0%. Now, where this light differs from my other experience with Aputure's lights, specifically their LS120D Mark IIs, is that the P60C uses a truly linear dimming scale, and the light storms that I have don't. As a result, this light only covers about 6 stops of brightness control as opposed to the nearly 10 stops the LS120Ds actually do. Moreover, since this is a linear scale, you have a lot of finesse in the brightest stops, almost too much in my opinion, and basically no finesse over the brightness in the darkest stops. Now that said, I can appreciate some of this may be technical in nature. I've played with designing PWM LED controls in the past, and it definitely requires more work and complexity and higher clock speeds and all kinds of stuff to make something that's capable of fine adjustments at low brightnesses, especially when that's coupled with very high PWM frequencies. Additionally, I can appreciate that Aputure may want to retain some market segmentation between their high-end and low-end product lines. That said, as a consumer, I also find it frustrating that most LEDs have adopted this kind of linear dimming system, or this 100% dimming system with varying ranges behind it. At least from a buyer's perspective, it makes it hard for me to understand what I'm actually getting. So my LS120D Mark IIs have nearly 10 stops of range covered in that 0 to 100% dimming control, while this light has only about a 6-stop range. However, both are marketed and both have specs that state continuous 0 to 100% range. While it would be great to be able to finesse the P60C's brightness at low output levels, unfortunately, it simply can't do that. Instead, if you need a lot of control but not a lot of light, you're going to need to stick some neutral density in front of the light so that you can turn the brightness up on the panel to where you have that kind of fine control. Now, one final thing I want to talk about briefly is blue LEDs and digital cameras. Now, this isn't specific to this light specifically, and it really does apply to all LEDs and LED lights. So one thing that I've run into is that it's very easy to saturate the blue channel with blue LEDs. As a result, there's often not a huge amount of control that you get over blues before they become completely saturated in the camera. Now, in their document for the Sidus Link software, Aputure talks about being able to limit the light's gamuts to a choice of between BT709, DCI-P3, and what they call a gamut, which is apparently BT2020. The intent is that you would limit the light can limit the saturation to keep from oversaturating the sensor, depending on which of those color spaces you're recording in. However, that feature is either not available on the Amaran P60C, not available in the version of the iOS app I have, or maybe it requires a pro subscription, even though it says nothing in the documentation says it does. In any event, in my experience, care is needed when dealing with blues and their intensity and saturation. So for example, here I'm adjusting the saturation of this blue light, and I can clearly see a difference happening in person, but the change the camera records is almost non-existent. So finally, let's talk a little bit about build quality. Now, the simple truth is I haven't had this light long enough to bang it around enough to really assess how it holds up long term. That said, on first impressions, the build is solid enough. There are 3/4 20-threaded sockets, one on the bottom and one on each of the two sides, making it fairly straightforward and flexible to mount in various situations and orientations. And while it doesn't have a yoke mount, which honestly it really should, given the side-mounted sockets, I think one could be fabricated and attached relatively easily. 2 small fans keep the light cool. Now on my light, they're silent, or at least they're quieter than the noise floor anywhere I've had the light to shoot, so they're basically silent. Now all that said, if I was to level one complaint at this light, it's basically the lack of a handle or really any good way to manipulate it when it's mounted on a light stand, especially when the softbox is attached. Now this is compounded by the lack of a yoke, which keeps the weight of the light centered around the pivot axis and provides inherent counterbalancing. However, instead what we have is a light stand adapter or umbrella holder. This places the entire weight of the light above the pivot point with nothing to counterbalance it and to stop it from flopping over when you loosen the tension, making it much harder to manipulate. Now finally, light modifiers. Since this is targeted as a creator's light, Aputure has included a collapsible softbox and grid for said softbox with the light in the box. Mounting the softbox to the light expands the light's aperture to 15 by 12.5 inches or 38 by 31.5 centimeters and adds roughly 4 inches or 10 centimeters to the light's overall depth. The grid adds another 2 inches on top of the depth of the softbox, or 5 centimeters, on top of all of that. However, the softbox is a bit of a mixed bag. It does work, but it has no internal diffusion, which that is also a bit of a mixed bag. So on one hand, it does not having internal diffusion means that more light makes it through, which given that this is only a 60-watt light, that is definitely desirable to have. However, the lack of central diffusion or internal diffusion does mean that the softbox isn't evenly illuminated when it's used. Now, the softbox attaches with 4 elastic bands that wrap around molded like protrusions, for lack of a better word, on the back of the panel. Quite honestly, I like this. It's secure enough, it's easy to install and remove, and it doesn't require any tools. Now, the inclusion of a grid is also something I like, as it helps control spill, which is always a problem with LED panel lights. However, using a grid does further reduce the brightness the light puts out, which isn't always a great option. That said, if there was one thing I found missing, even if it was a separately purchased accessory, is a set of barn doors. Barn doors basically allow you to control spill, perhaps not quite as effectively as a grid does, without the cost and brightness in the center of the beam. Speaking for myself, in my environment at least, I often find that barn doors are much more effective at controlling background and rim lights than grids are, and I'm often forced to flag lights using black wrap to achieve the same end, just much less elegantly. With all the options on the market, the question then is, why did I choose Aputure's products instead of something else? Well, some of that comes down to already having some investment in their product line. As I said, my main video lights are Aputure's LS120D Mark IIs, and I've been very impressed with their quality and performance. Moreover, I like that their Sidus wireless control uses Bluetooth instead of Wi-Fi. Now, while the Amaran line is designed to be less expensive, most of the critical performance metrics are just as good as their flagship lights, and most of the other features I expected to be fairly similar, which by and large is the case. Now, while I do have some complaints, they're relatively minor, all things considered. For example, the Sidus Link App could be better at exposing all the settings on this light, but then again, it's software that can be updated at any time. For that matter, these lights do support firmware updates as well, so they can be improved over time as well. Now, I don't really do recommendations with reviews, so the question to wrap this up is simple. Would I buy the P60C again, and would I buy more? And the answer to both of those questions is yes. I have no regrets in buying this light, and I will likely end up with another one or two down the road as I replace some of my cheapest LED lights with more capable options. So that about wraps up this look at Aputure's Amaran P60C RGB LED panel. If you found this useful, let me know by hitting that like button and sharing it. I don't do reviews often, but if this kind of thing seems like it might be your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.